We continue our conversations with all 17 of the candidates for Denver mayor, joined today by Thomas Wolf, investment banker, two-time candidate for Denver mayor. You enjoyed it so much the first time, you're back for a second go.
There you go.
So you say that politicians promise too many things to too many people, and that a better approach would be to focus on one or two big issues. And your main focus is clearing Denver's homeless encampments. I'm curious what happens to the single-issue campaign now that so many other candidates are saying pretty much the same thing about encampments. I mean, it's the #1 issue, and people are flocking to where you are on the issue.
Yeah. I mean, it's if your senses work and you walk or bike around or drive through our city, you just can't unsee, unsmell, unhear this humanitarian crisis that we're beset with, and we're 3 years into it. So I'm glad that everybody's coming on board, but then it's going to be a matter of who has a plan and who's going to act. And it's a heavy lift, and you have to have absolute resolve that you know this is the right way to go, because there's going to be massive blowback. You're going to step on some toes, but it's the right thing, and it's the only way to heal our city. Our city needs a remedy. There's a humanitarian side, but then there's also, this is fiscal suicide if we do not solve this problem.
Talk about that aspect of it.
Yeah, so the two biggest drivers you can see are our commercial property values. So our central business district, particularly the uptown side, is plummeting in value. And what you have to realize, there's a building I'm very familiar with that just lost, the new price is $40 million below the last price, okay? And what you need to know is that commercial property is taxed at 4 times what residential is. So when I've been in neighborhoods and talking to people to try to get them to understand the magnitude of this issue, I say, when you get home tonight, point around your neighborhood and see what sort of perimeter you have to do to get rid of $160 million worth of residential property. That's the sort of hole you're creating in the budget of DPS, which it's 50% of DPS's budget comes from the property tax base, and then it's about 10% of my budget as your mayor. So that's a huge issue. The second part of this is that we have this beautiful in business we refer to as a flywheel, great economic, benefit generator. I think of the App Store. Our App Store are the visitors that come to Denver, and that the sales tax dollars that generates, the lodging tax dollars, and they aren't coming back. The data shows they're not coming back because our city is unsafe and filthy. That you're killing the golden goose here, okay? That is, we need to halt that, and the issue is encampments.
So you've made the financial case for ending encampments. Convince me that you care about them as people, the people who live in them.
Yeah, you have to start out as, okay, I've owned commercial property. I owned commercial property for 2 decades, down by the first snooze. So 20 years ago, moved back from England, thought it was a good idea, a good investment. The Montforts in the city had just made a $500 million infrastructure investment. Love Ryan and Tara Dunn at Great Divide Brewery. That was on the up and up. That's going to turn this neighborhood around. Snooze is going to turn this neighborhood around. The old La Capole, the French restaurant was there. I was like, I love this neighborhood. Versus all of that, the shelters and the encampments and the issues there have won, hands down.
But I asked you about the humanity of the folks who are living in the
so
city. You're talking to me about real estate.
I know. When I owned that property, I knew the people that would camp or sleep overnight on my property. Alfonso from New Jersey. I could go down a list of all of these people. Their need is shelter. Until we solve that for them, these are Denver's neediest, okay? And you have to shelter them, okay? And you can go, I worked in a Catholic Charities Habitat for Humanity type issue in New York City doing affordable housing. These NGOs and faith-based organizations that are trying to do their best are on the same issue with this, that the encampments are not allowing them to do what the do-gooding they're trying to do. So the hard part about that is you can't scale that. That is a really tough one. I can scale shelter yesterday, and I can get that done. So that's the start. And then to the extent that these people start making better life decisions, or are able to because they're sheltered, then we can make some headway.
So that's a housing first approach, not a treatment first approach?
You have to be very specific. Shelter versus housing. Shelter, there's a continuum. I saw a report from Metro State where there's a $1,000 Arctic tent, which is, it's a hell of a lot better than what people were in last night on the curb when it's single-digit temperatures. There's a pallet home that's maybe $10,000. There's the tiny homes that are $20,000. Okay, and it says home, but it's really just shelter because they're movable, right? The differentiator on housing is that it's fixed. So you need to have a continuum of these and graduate people through it as they make better as their living conditions improve. Hopefully, they'll be able to make better decisions on chemical dependency, on mental illness, on all of those things that the rehabilitative services can find them in these locations and serve them.
So in your mind then, would the availability of the better shelter or home be contingent upon them making what you deem to be the better life choices? Is that how they progress in the system?
Yeah, behavioral psych, to go into science as opposed to finance, is about carrots and sticks. It's how do you motivate people. Currently, we're drowning them in carrots, okay, and we're not getting any outcomes we want. If we can get them sheltered, it's our bad for whatever reason, let's get them sheltered, and then, hey, do you like that pallet home? Wouldn't it be interesting if you could be in that pallet home? Can you start doing, there's a pathway to it.
Your plan focuses primarily, it seems, on the unsheltered homeless, who also happen to be the visible homeless, when we know that there's a huge contingent of people who are crashing on couches and sleeping in cars and things like that. Does your plan extend to them as well, or is it just worried about the people experiencing homelessness we can see?
Okay, played a lot of sports, been in business, anything. You have to set attainable goals. Okay, this is a population of, seen different censuses, but maybe it's around 2,000 people. This is a solvable problem. Okay, and it's dire. In financial terms, this is it's very inhumane to call it a liability. I've already said it's a humanitarian issue. These are Denver's neediest. Let's get past that. This is a liability that's compounding against us. Any business person that looked at where their expenditures are or whatever their investments are, and they see a liability compounding against it, that gets your attention. That's the biggest red flag ever.
And that's how you would describe Denver's population, people who are unhoused.
Denver's encampments.
Denver's encampments.
Yeah.
Okay. You were one of the most vocal critics of the idea of rent control in our debate conversation the other night. You were not the only critic for sure, but I mean, you essentially said it's nonsense. Explain.
Okay, so I work in the global capital markets, and there's a continuum of how capital gets deployed relative to risk and reward, from one end of debt to the other end of equity and all the risk in between. We're trying to solve housing. It's a supply and demand issue. There isn't enough. We're trying to attract capital to build housing. And rent control, you increase the risk and decrease the reward. That will not encourage more capital to show up in our market. It's like any natural law. It's like Boyle's gas law. There's three inputs. It's that straightforward. This isn't subjective. This is just flat out how it is, and it's been proven in all the communities.
Why do you think so many cities keep trying it?
I don't know. I mean, the group that I mentioned that I worked for in New York City was kind of a Habitat for Humanity clone. And Habitat for Humanity, I wanted to give a shout out to them the other night because a guy that I met during that was probably a lot like the homeless people. He came from a rural area off of a farm. He had served in the military. I met him because he was a big sponsor of Habitat for Humanity, and he would come by and he would visit a squatter on 6th between like C and D. It was this wonderful shaman from Jamaica who was also a great sculptor named Eli, and Eli would make him wait until he had his coffee ready, and then President Carter would step out of his motorcade and come have coffee with Eli. So it was just a fascinating story. Sorry, I digress there, but there are models that work. The private sector, investors deliver on housing at the highest rate, best pricing than anything your city is ever going to do.
So you apply that same model to the idea then of social housing, the city getting into a development model?
it's, you tell me what, Debbie Ortega said she's going to bring housing at a 40% discount to where it's currently built. This is somebody that served on city council for however long. I pressed her on the issue, and she said it's going to come from England. So that housing has the legs to get here from England, and I want to buy some. I would love to invest in that, because that's not likely.
Listening to you describe this issue versus the other candidates, the difference in the language that you use is really striking. And charitably, it could be described as, as calculated or pragmatic or something like that. And then less charitably described, it sounds cold.
Yeah, so I mean, I start at, well, here's people like, okay, you can't treat this like a business, okay? Well, the beautiful thing is that you can and should, because if you look at the numbers, they are going to inform you the best. They don't answer everything, but they get you a lot closer to the right answer than anything else. So let's start there and then figure it out from there. The reason you have to treat it like a business is, thankfully, you've seen in any of these city bankruptcies, it's in the municipal code, it's Chapter 9 instead of Chapter 7. So when it all goes down bad like it did in Detroit, that judge says, we'll treat we're going to treat it like a business. So on the last day, if you treat it on the last day like a business, why don't we treat it as a business right now?
So another thing is that Americans, not just at the local level, but I mean, look at national politicians, seem to be really interested in candidates who profess to care deeply about people and issues and that kind of thing. And you hear a lot of that in politics. It's who can care the most about somebody else. And I hear you saying, everybody cares. Let's set that aside and talk about the solutions. Is that fair to describe your approach that way?
You don't jump into this peculiar job interview, the circus that it is with umpteen candidates, unless you care. I mean, we all froze our backside off out in front of the city and county building a few nights ago, earlier this week, and we're just heckled by the unhoused who are trying to help. And it all comes back to budget. If they're basically cutting their own throats, because that budget's not going to be there, and we've already seen that the decisions are made that they're the last one in line to get any of that budget. And now it's going to shrink the budget. There's even less chance that it gets solved.
When you talk about your overall philosophy that politicians promise too much, try to do too much, too many things at once, is it just that you think that the mayor shouldn't have his or her hands in so many things, or do you think the city of Denver does too much for too many people in too many places? Would you want to scale back government more generally?
So in engineer speak, it's called mission creep. So like if we had anybody grab your remote control at home, there's like 3 buttons you use, and there's 50 on there, right? I think that's absolutely the case with the city. If you go on the website, and I love what they've been able to do with some of the technology, with the gov.org and everything else, but there are 50-some different departments. It is the most, tangled mess of, dysfunction you could imagine. I mean...
So what's the city doing that it shouldn't be?
It starts with leadership, and what you hear is that the leadership's pretty much not present. So you need to be present, because otherwise your staff, as well as their staff, don't think that they need to be present either.
But do you think that Denver should pull back whole scale from various things that it does and pour that money into the most critical priorities?
Well, of course, I'm going to solve encampments first, because it's the root cause. Until you address that, everything, whatever metaphor you want to do, the boat's sinking, Rome is burning, you tell me which one you think is most fitting, but it's absolutely the case. A lot of these other departments are trying to do good things, but they're effectively just bailing water. The ship's still sinking. Encampments are the hole in the boat.
Thomas Wolf, thank you for your time. I appreciate it very much.
Appreciate it.